I'm in Weymouth on the Dorset coast in the south of England. It's a beautiful port, but one with an ugly claim to fame in the annals of English history.
Let me take you back to the eve of the Feast of St. John, the 23rd of June, 1348. It was a festival of fertility. The wheat was ripening in the fields. Unmarried women were dancing. This was the one opportunity they had each year to flirt with unmarried men without the priests tut-tutting. It was a celebration of life. And yet on that very day, death was working its way through the town.
Carried here by some Gascon sailors from France, death came in the form of a bacillus, in the guts of fleas, perhaps on the body of one of the sailors, perhaps on one of the rats that scuttled down the gangplanks when the ship came into harbour. And within hours of its arrival here in England, the bacillus was spreading. Victims noticed swellings in the groin, in the armpit. Within 4 days, they were dying, hacking up infected sputum with their last breath. And so it spread, the Black Death. Within 18 months, almost half the population of England would be dead. I want to examine the impact of the Black Death, both in the short and in the long term. And for this investigation, I'm moving east now to a different part of the country, to East Anglia, to Suffolk and Norfolk, and to the old medieval city of Norwich. Norwich once was England's second city. Its old Norman castle still dominates the skyline, and its streets are peppered with reminders of a proud medieval past. There were 57 churches in medieval Norwich. They serviced a bustling metropolis of 7,000 souls.
They must have felt comfortably immune here when the first reports were heard of plague in the southwest. But by the beginning of 1349, the plague had spread from Bristol to London. By February, it was creeping up the East Anglian coastline. You can imagine the mounting fear here in Norwich. And so they chose to close the city gates. Like many medieval cities, Norwich was encircled by a city wall. The trouble was they closed the gates too late. The infection was already inside.
This part of the city's called Tombland. It must have seemed chillingly appropriate as the Black Death swept through the population. Tombland was your classic medieval quarter. Narrow streets, overhanging buildings, from which men and women, ignorant of basic hygiene, chucked slops onto the streets below, through which the plague carts trundled. Bring out your dead. According to the chronicles, within weeks, 2/3 of the stalls in the market square stood empty. Rich and poor, from the guild to the gutter, all gone to meet their maker.
And this was where they brought the bodies. Cathedral Close, the site of massive plague pits. No time for a proper burial. Their bodies were just chucked in without ceremony. And when the men who manned the plague pits died on the job, keeling over their shovels, their bodies were just lobbed in with the others.
It might have helped if they'd burnt the bodies, not buried them. The trouble was they had no idea of what was causing the disease. This was an age before microbiology, before medicine, before science as we understand them. And so the medieval mind struggled to explain this disaster.
They blamed it on bad air. They blamed it on the planets, on the juxtaposition of Mars and Saturn. But most of all, it seemed, this was a sign of God's displeasure. Like the flood in the days of Noah, they all knew their Bible stories. God, it seems, was wiping clean his sinful creation. And not just people, priests were dying in disproportionate numbers. Hardly surprising. They were the ones most likely to be at the bedsides of those at death's door. But it seemed a sign the church had failed.
And so emerged an extraordinary sight. Lines of so-called flagellants, men and women weaving across the nation, whipping themselves, hoping through pain to earn God's favor. All they managed to do was to spread the disease further, out into the countryside.
Here's an incredible statistic. In the city of Norwich, out of a population of about 7,000, 5,000 people died. And in my mind, I always think of the Black Death as an urban phenomenon, a consequence of all of that dirt and pollution, all those people crammed together. The fact is, you read accounts of life out in the countryside in those years. It's horrifying. Bodies decomposing by the wayside, crops unharvested, rotting in the fields, cows with no one to milk them, lowing in distress, their udders distended, and whole villages deserted, ploughs and scythes rusting.
The Black Death was a national disaster. It would take 400 years for the population of England to climb back to pre-Black Death levels. The question now to ask is, how did this cataclysm affect England in the longer term? And I'm heading south from Norwich into Suffolk to find out.